Hey everybody, this is Joel over at importsauce.com, and today I'm going to show you a trick on how I doubled the size of my intercooler for less than $200 here on this Volvo S40. Okay, so if you are upgrading your air intake system, not simply the filter, but we're talking the filter and the charge pipe and the hoses, we're talking maybe the inlet manifolds, things like that, the intercooler is right in line with that. So for Volvo S40s or any other P1, we know there's only a few manufacturers that are going to make an oversized or a performance intercooler for this. And currently those are ranging anywhere between like $700 up to like $900, something like that. So this isn't any hack or trick that I invented. Found this on sweetspeed.com. We'll have the link to the original thread down below. And essentially what it is taking a larger intercooler, which is going to be from a later model Volvo, and purchasing that and then hooking that guy up and just letting that bigger original Volvo sized intercooler be your performance upgrade. So what we did here is this intercooler is off of 2015 to 2018. It goes on the XC60s, it goes on the V60s, the S60s, a few of the S80s, and same one that's used for the T60 R-Designs and some of the other performance applications. This is a Nissan. Got this from FCP Euro. When I purchased it last year, 2021, it was about $170 shipped. Currently, I just looked at what it was right now. It's $240 plus tax plus shipping. So you're still probably going to be maybe under $300, but compared to some of the other performance ones on the market, in terms of the price point, this is definitely going to be the cheapest way to go. What we did here is initially just look at the measurements. So the factory intercooler that it comes with is 2 inches, 4 inches by 26. If we multiply those all together, it's going to give us 231 cubic inches of space on here. This one is going to be just about 6 inches by 4.5 deep, and same width there is going to be 26. So when we multiplied all those, it came out to be almost double, 468. So essentially twice the cubic inches in terms of volume on the actual core. One of the drawbacks that there is, but may not be a drawback, is a lot of those performance intercoolers are going to come with the sides that are also metal. And so essentially that's going to be stronger than the plastic that factory comes with. These ones, because it is an OEM part, did not come with metal core brackets on the side or the housings. So we're only boosting 18, 19, maybe 20 pounds. We're probably not going to go much more than that. And we figure even on a tuned XC60 or T60 R-Design where these are used, that these end caps should hold up to 20 PSI, no problem. Another thing to note is it did not have a spot for our sensor on here. So what we did is we went to the junkyard, we grabbed another sensor just so that we had one available before we had to install it. And essentially on the end cap, we took a 1/2 inch drill bit and drilled that down, and that was the perfect diameter to put the sensor on. We have a skirt gasket that we then use to seal it. And then for the actual single mounting torque screw, we just used a 1/8 and drilled a screw hole, and then we were able to secure that all in. It's all buttoned up on there, no problem. One other thing we did have to do to make it work is the hose inlet and outlet on here are obviously smaller than the new application. Those are using bigger holes. So what we did is we bought some hoses that were actually just reducers. So they would go onto the larger end cap, but shrink down enough to go back onto our 2 feed pipes for the inlet and the outlet on there. So we were able to do that with a couple extra hose clamps, and then those part numbers will also be down in the description, but those were 2 reducers and then 2 sleeves. It was less than maybe $15. So when we purchased this guy and all of those different reducers and hoses, we were at about 200 bucks. Again, right now you might be paying somewhere with all of that, shipping, tax, everything, maybe about 300 or so. It's important to note that we were able to use the factory mounting points. So on the newer intercooler, it did have some different tabs on the bottom, but when we put them up, they lined up with where the brackets were, and we just used M6x1 bolts, maybe about 1 inch long, and they threaded right into the mount for this. And then once you have the hoses on both sides crimped on, everything is locked in really solid. We already test fitted the bumper, stuck that on there, and it fits. There's no clearance issues. We're not shaving anything. One thing to note is that on some other videos, when people put the DOA8 on there, they do have to shave down the feed or the air director that goes around the intercooler. And let me just grab that here, which is going to be this guy. So on the factory application, the intercooler is there, and this will mount around it just to really get that air in from the bumper. That's the one thing we're not going to put back on. I saw on those other videos, they did some shaving, they did some trimming, but this guy is so massive that to get it back on, it's not going to without cutting or misshaping it. The hole in the bumper essentially is the same shape, so the air is going to be coming in just the same. We may lose a little up in the side, but worst comes to worst, that's just going to hit our radiator and give us some extra airflow up on that. So the actual install, I think it took, and this was just kind of figuring it out, so if you're watching the video on what we did, you should be able to do it a lot quicker, but I would say maybe all in 45 minutes. Pull the headlights, pull the bumper, pull the fog lights, disconnect them. This comes off pretty easily. There's only 2 torque screws holding this in on the top. The top or the bottom just sits down into a little groove. Once those 2 came off, the whole thing, loosened the hoses, popped right off. And then at that point, we were kind of going back and forth with our hole for the sensor, and then some WD-40 on the end of those larger hoses. They were a little tighter, and the end caps, got those on there, cinched everything down, and then did the test fit on the bumper. So essentially putting the bumper back on and just wrapping it up and going for a test drive. But you know, we'll report back on that. But again, this has already been done by a lot of other members on Sweet Speed, and they had reported that you know, they did see the benefit of the increased volume size in terms of cooling. They didn't see any negative effects in terms of it was too large or there was any airflow issues with it. So we'll take it for a drive and we'll see. So again, all the part numbers are down below, and then the full write-up step-by-step will also be on importsofts.com. The link for that article is also in the description.
Okay, so one thing that we found out the hard way after the installation is you'll see we originally used those sleeves that are on the right there, and got those on eBay. Those did not have barbed ends like the one that you see on the left. So we kept blowing our intercooler charge pipe. They did fit snugly on there, and we did clamp them down, but under boost, and our full max PSA right now is about 18, the hose would blow off and the car would completely stall. So I would figure that without the turbocharger running and pushing that air, that maybe it would just be running like in a limp mode or something like that. Unfortunately, it just lost power and you could not do anything with it. So there we are on the side of the freeway. Was one of our most eventful experiences, and then having to tie it with a shoestring and limp it all the way home. So the moral is definitely get the sleeves that have the barbed ends so that the hose can go over it, and the hose clamp will actually secure it to it. Okay, let's go ahead and talk numbers. So this spreadsheet, and looking at it, it looks like, man, it's been almost a year since I did this video, and I'm sorry it took almost 12 months to finish it. But you know, stuff happens. So on the data log, we pulled out, and this is our stock intercooler. So we ran this before, and we kept track of a few things: ambient air temperature. So what's the temperature outside? What's the temperature on the intake? And then we just ran a quick calculation on Excel to tell us what the difference is. The first column minus, or the second column minus first. And then out of that, we did a formula that would take all of these and give us an average of all the data points. And then we picked out the highest temperature on the intake, and we picked out the highest difference, which would be intake temperature over the ambient temperature, and then also the lowest to see how close it was as well. So on here, I think there's just about, what do we have? Almost 2,000 data points. So this is through Dash Command and our Bluetooth OBD2. It grabs a data point, I think, like 3 or 5 every second. So we can see. Right, and this was in May, 6,000 foot elevation, so it was about 64 degrees outside. If I scroll down and look, yeah, the whole trial run, 64, got up to 66 at the end of the run. And what we see is the average temperature of the intake when we did the difference and then averaged it was about 20 degrees with the stock intake. And on a 64, 65 degree day, the highest intake temp got up to almost 130 in terms of that. And that means that the highest intake over ambient was almost 63 degrees difference. And then the lowest, the best performing, I mean, ideally you can get your intake temp to be at ambient without taking any engine heat or, you know, being cooled down. It was at 7, and that was probably somewhere at the end of the run after a cool down. So average is 20 degrees over, and the highest got up to 63. So let's go ahead and look at the post intercooler. So this was done, looks like May 30th. The other one was, let's take a look, 27th, 3 days later. We were waiting for similar temperature, right? So we have our thousands of data points here, all about the same, 61, maybe a few degrees cooler, but pretty much similar in terms of the temperature. Now let's go ahead and look here. Even on startup, it was coming in recording as almost, you know, for the first bit of the run, almost the same. Our average intake over ambient was actually only 6 degrees. Let's pull these up side by side just so that we can see. If we shrink this down, we have the stock intercooler down here on the bottom. We have the upgraded one above it, right? So the stock one, we were at 19 degrees over was our average, and on the new intercooler, or the double the size intercooler, we were only at 6 degrees. So 19 and a half, let's call that, and let's call this round up and call that 6.5, right? So 13 degrees difference. The high intake temp on here, 130, and the highest it got here was only 80 degrees. So that's definitely a major difference when you're at that peak, or when you got you know, a lot of heat going on through there as well. And then the highest over ambient, what was the highest intake temp compared to the outside air? 63 degrees above, and then with the new intercooler, only 15. Lowest intake over 7, so you know, this column doesn't really mean much, but we can see here at many points in the run that the difference was the same. It was cooling it that quick that the air going in was the same as the ambient. So I mean, just like I said, the main number average of that run, 20 degrees, let's call it 20, and let's call it 6, so 14, 13 and a half degrees difference just on the intake temp. And we didn't isolate the boost or any other pressures there, but when we did analyze those, we saw no difference. It's not like we had a bottleneck or we had any loss of pressure or lack of boost or anything like that due to the extra volume, because theoretically the air system is very similar, where it's going to compress and it's going to fill that air, and once it hydraulically, or once it seals or pressurizes itself, that you're not going to have too much variation on there as well. So definitely, just based on these numbers, we can see that there was a good difference there.